Don't know where to start. I really don't. I fell in love with this record. This record was a breath of fresh air in the summer of 1989. You had hip hop here, you got the hair metal, you got the synthetic pop music of these pop princesses uh, like Debbie Gibson, Tiffany, Paula Abdul, and in the midst of it, just right out of nowhere, echoes of classic rock. The echo progressive rock. Echoes of it from the late 60s and early 70s, lending to some nostalgic vibes from a completely different era from the late 80s. And boy, bringing back 1971 and 72 when Yes came out with songs like Your Move, and there was Roundabout in 72, and Long Distance Run Around, and You and I, and oh God, You and I in the fall of 1972. They were not a singles band per se, they were an album band, yes. But interesting enough, in the 80s of all decades, they achieved their biggest commercial success, a bit with a different lineup, although John Anderson was still lead singing, owner of The Lonely Heart in the fall of 1983, which went to #1, followed by Leave It in 1984, big commercial success stories, another album that came out by Yes in 1987 that was commercial success. Well, now at number 18, up from 23, Hot Rotation Video on MTV. Remember it so vividly. 30 years ago, but remember it like, well, week before last. Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe. Among the original, well, not the original members of Yes, but we'll just say the early members of Yes, although Anderson and Bruford were the original members when Yes formed in 1968. But anyway, we got this song, Brother of Mine. Even got a little bit of that peace, love, late 60s vibe embedded in this record, embedded in the theme, I guess, of this record. And oh my goodness, it was like, God, I can't believe this. Progressive rock making a little bit of a comeback in 1989. So far removed, though, that era, so far of the late 80s, so far removed, it seemed, from the late 60s and early 70s. Well, here we go. Here's the thing about John Anderson. God, he was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant on Roundabout, his impassioned lyrics on Long Distance Run Around and You and I, and I just thought he was just something else. Well, by the late 80s, he felt that Yes and the incarnation it was in the 80s was getting too commercial. He was not happy with that. Too commercial, not too pop. Because, yes, you got to think about these progressive bands in the late 60s and early 70s. Traffic, King Crimson, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Jeff Tull, yes, to some extent, Led Zeppelin. Well, Led Zeppelin were a progressive band. They were not album bands. They were not like, hey, let's put some singles on. Let's load this album with singles and let's just go top 10 all over the place. No, these were experimental. They were taking rock and roll, making rock and roll into an art form. They were taking it, they were going galactic with creativity, although critics argued with some justification that they were a little too pompous. And this song just brought back an echo of that. All those, it is like standing in an echo chamber of progressive rock, listening to this song, watching the video on MTV back in the summer of '89. Well, here's the deal. John Anderson got dissatisfied. He left Yes in 1988. He went to a Greek island called Hydra, teamed up with Vangelis. Not the first time he teamed up with Vangelis, wrote some songs together. Later on, after he wrote some songs with Vangelis, he ran into Steve Howe, one of the early members of Yes at an airport. And John Anderson was going, look, I got these new records. Check out these demos, man. Check out Brother of Mine. Listen to the chorus of this record. Tell me how you like it. And so this thing started to get ginned up, and here we go. We got Bill Bruford, the drummer, Steve Howe, guitarist, and Rick Wakeman. I believe Wakeman joined Yes in 1972, the keyboard player. And we got Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman and Howe, and they put together some demos. About 5 weeks, I believe. I got down on my notes. They went to a recording studio and and Paris, and they made some demos, and then they started doing some. They went to they went to Air Studios in Montserrat, down I believe it's in the Caribbean. The Police recorded much of their album Ghost in the Machine there, and this was a epic recording studio at the time. And as a matter of fact, Bill Bruford, the drummer, he had reservations because it was with all these early members of Yes teaming up, not calling themselves Yes, but teaming up to make an album. He had some reservations. He said, this could be trouble because you got this other group called Yes that now has the name Yes. And he's thinking, this is turning into a Yes project. And he told these guys that at the airport. They met at the airport along with the manager of Yes. And Bruford said, this is looking like a Yes project. And I thought I was drumming for a John Anderson solo album. Well, so they made they worked on the demos at this recording studio in France, and then about 6 weeks, Air Studios in Montserrat down in the Caribbean or way out in the ocean somewhere, tropical weather and all that, really nice place, unless a hurricane comes through, but. And then John Anderson took over the mixing of this album at Bearsfield Studio, the legendary Bearsfield Studio over in New York near Woodstock, founded by Albert Grossman, Bob Dylan's manager in 1969. The Bearsfield Studios, Todd Rundgren recorded there, and so did Janis Joplin, another legendary recording studio. Now, during this time, when the demos were getting put together, John, this really blew me away. John Anderson, he roped in a session guitar player. Bear with me, hang with me, because I wrote his name down. I forgot it, but he played with loads of people in the 90s and 2000s, and I got his name down. Milton MacDonald. Sessionaire Milton MacDonald, who later toured with the British group Take That. He's played on recording sessions. Milton MacDonald later played on recording sessions. Albums by S Club 7, Spice Girls, Hair and Say, Atomic Kitten, all these groups that were pop groups that were popular in England in the 90s and early 2000s. And he's played with Robert Palmer, played on sessions with Robert Palmer, and people, Moving On Up. Remember Moving On Up in 1995? Very prolific guitar player, Milton MacDonald, playing on this album with John Anderson, Bill Bruford and company. Now, when they started recording Montserrat, it was it was Bill Bruford. Bill Bruford said, "Let's bring in a bass player." Tony Levin, Levin, probably mispronounced his last name, of King Crimson. He was brought in to play bass on this album. And they came out with this song, Brother of Mine. The album went to number 14. Got it number 14 in the UK, number 30 here in the States. Pretty respectable. I mean, not bad. Not a classic Yes album per se, but it did respectably well. The album sold 750,000 copies, self-titled. Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe. Looking over my notes to see if there's anything that I missed. I think I covered everything. The demos, when they worked on those demo tracks at that recording studio in Paris, 5 weeks, another 6 weeks of coming up with these things at the Air Studio in Montserrat. So they really worked hard on this album, and it paid off. Really did. Nice, beautiful record on my pop fantasy playlist of July 30th, 1989. Progressive rock, making a little bit of a comeback. John Anderson. God, it was great hearing his voice again. John Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe. bringing back some of the sensibilities of that old, yes, that old progressive rock back in the late 60s and early 70s. Brother of Mine at number 18, up 5 from 23 on this fantasy playlist, July 30th, 1989.